So far, chapter 12, we said we found out the discount rate that's appropriate to the risk. And we've been talking about these ingredients that we need for the decision rules, like we had in chapter 7, and we're always talking about the cash flows. But we haven't quite gotten down to showing you how to arrive at the cash flows. So that's a big portion of chapter 8. In fact, I'm going to be doing an example. And you guys may have already noticed that I have some formulas on the board. By the way, do you think the formulas I write on the board are important? Yeah. Do you think they should be in your notes? Yeah. Do you think they should be on your note sheet? Yes. Very good. Okay. Now let's talk about what kinds of numbers we should be using. Oh, for shame, she's late. We should use real cash flows, not accounting numbers. Do I have any accountants in here? Oh, Canada. Wait a minute, isn't that your national anthem? Oh, Canada. Okay. What kinds of things do we have in accounting numbers that don't represent real cash flow? Depreciation? Inventory.
Accounts payable.
Okay, so inventory, I get where you're going. Accounts payable. So there's all sorts of things. So think about the income statement. When we go out and buy stuff, instead of spending cash, we get an accounts payable. When we sell stuff, instead of getting cash, we have an accounts receivable, right? And then we also have depreciation. We also have, deferred taxes. There's all sorts of crap in accounting numbers that does not represent real cash flow. And so we are going to have to either back into those numbers from accounting numbers or just start straight from the cash figures. Okay, so what kinds of cash flows are we interested in? And the answer is incremental. An incremental cash flow is, oh, for shame, it's late. You've been missing so much, I thought you'd drop the class. I'm pleased that you're here.
You missed last week.
You said you were going to come see me during office hours.
Yes, I traveled, so.
Okay. That's okay. Is that your phone?
I'm just kidding.
Oh my goodness. So I planned for this for comic relief, right? Okay, so incremental cash flows are cash flows that are only going to be different if we make the investment. It's really hard for people to wrap their heads around this. In fact, so cash flows that are going to occur regardless of our decision are not included because those cash flows are not different as a result of having made a decision. And then, even more difficult for us to wrap our heads around are cash flows that could happen if we reject the project. And so those are included. So we'll talk about those. What you need to do is ask yourself, will my decision on the project impact this cash flow? And if the answer is yes, then it is an incremental cash flow. But if it's going to be the same regardless, then it will not be any different. Any questions so far? Okay, let's talk about some of these different kinds of costs. First of all, we have sunk costs. These are costs, this is money that's already been spent, and we cannot get it back regardless. And sometimes students think that if they have borrowed money, it doesn't count. But that's not true because borrowed money must be paid back. And so let's assume that you went out and borrowed money to buy a car. And after about a year, you decided you were going to take on some Uber or Lyft driving to try to make some extra money. At that point, should you be counting your loan payments as a cost for your project of Uber driving or Lyft driving? The answer is no, because you're going to be making those payments regardless of the decision made on the project. And so those are not incremental to the decision. So you have spent a lot of money, hopefully, or not hopefully, Unfortunately, you spent a lot of money to get your education. Now you are thinking about what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And you have been offered two jobs. One is a job that uses your business education, and the other is as a circus performer. And they both pay exactly the same. Do you consider the time, effort, and money you've put into your education when making this decision? Absolutely not. Because that cost is behind us, right? That cost is behind us. So my mom was a little upset with me when I left my job to go to doctoral school. She says, "What about all that work you put into the engineering degree?" That's in the rearview mirror. If I'll be happier going forward doing this, should I consider that? Absolutely not. So that's a sunk cost. And we'll see lots of people dealing with sunk cost fallacies. We do not include them. So what are some of the sunk costs that we may see in our projects? First of all, let's talk about the marketing survey. The marketing survey. So you own a goat dairy. And by the way, you've got a bunch of goats and you have more goat milk than you can sell. So what do you decide to do? You say, maybe we could make chocolate goat milk. But you have to ask yourself, is there a market for chocolate goat milk? And so how do we find out if there's a market for chocolate goat milk? We do the marketing survey. And if I remember, Ms. Dariani is a marketing person. Ms. Dariani, how much would you charge me to find out if goat milk, chocolate goat milk, will sell? Okay, so let me give you a hint here. If you're in marketing, every marketing study I ever interacted with, and keep in mind I've been out of this game for 22 years now, every marketing study I ever interacted with was at least $250,000. Oh yeah. Okay, so always start with $250,000 or higher, and then you can work your way down to $250,000. Okay, now the next thing to ask is, how is she going to find out whether chocolate goat milk is viable? What would you do? How are you going to find out?
Questionnaire.
What's that?
Questionnaire survey.
Send out a survey.
Yeah.
So let's say we mail a bunch of surveys to people. What do you think of chocolate goat milk? How many people have ever drank chocolate goat milk? I know I haven't, right? So what does that mean we need to do?
Samples.
Yeah, you got to get in front of them with the samples, and don't even tell them that it's goat milk until after they've tasted it, right? Because it could kind of mess with it. Okay, so you give them the chocolate goat milk, and then you record, and they're like, that's good, or oh, damn, right? So there are the different reactions. And then for the people who say that they like it, then you have to ask them how much they would be willing to spend for a liter of goat milk or whatever. Okay, so now we're going to go. We've got this information. What are we going to do if Ms. Dariani comes back with, oh, people hate that. People just despise goat milk. Are we going to go ahead with our analysis? No. Do we still have to pay Ms. Dariani $250,000?
Yes.
Yes. And here's why. What if I tell a marketing person, please go out and do a survey. And if the answer is yes, people like goat milk, I'll pay you $250,000. And if the answer is no, people don't like goat milk, then I don't pay you anything. What answer is the marketing person always going to come back with?
Yes.
Yeah, they're always going to come back with yes, because that's the way they get paid. By the way, we're dealing with people who have the moral flexibility to convince teenage boys that they can attract women with Axe body spray, right? So we know these people and the truth have a tenuous relationship at best. If I want the truth out of them, I've got to pay them either way. Now, what does that mean when we start thinking about our project? Should we consider that $250,000 we spent on the marketing survey as an incremental cash flow? No, because we had to spend it either way, right? And so now we are going to leave that behind, turn our minds to the future, and dump that thing. Now, let's talk about environmental impact studies. And I'm going to pick the absolute worst place on earth for environmental impact studies. It's called the state of California. And in the state of California, if you're going to, let's say, build a gas station, you've got to hire a bunch of experts to come out and look at the site to make sure that there aren't any problems. Number one, they'll make you hire an endangered species specialist who will come out and see if yours is the only land around where the native three-toed sloth is mating, right? And if so, then they'll probably tell you that you can't build your gas station there because the sloth is more important than humans. Okay, number two, they will say, well, we need to know if there is any kind of spill here, will it get into any of the local waterways? So we have to hire a hydrologist. Number three, we need to find out if there are any relics of native cultures on this location. So we're going to have to call in an anthropologist or an archaeologist to assess the situation. Now, each one of these people is a professional with years of education. What do you think? Do you think they're going to do this for free? No, they're going to expect to be paid quite well. So let's just assume $30,000 a piece. So you bring in the anthropologist first because they probably have time on their hands. You bring in the anthropologist first and they kick around your lot, they dig a few holes and they say, yeah, you're good to go. There are no ancient artifacts here. And then you bring in the endangered species person and they kick around the bushes and all they see are just some common lizards. And you can find these lizards anywhere, so they say you're good to go. And then finally, you bring in the hydrologist. And the hydrologist looks around and looks at maps and elevations and says, not to worry, if you had a spill here, it would just go into this little depression over here. It's not going to get into the river. So you're good to go. Now, you have all those opinions. And you can, at this point, decide to move forward. I've spent $90,000. Do I consider that as a cash flow on my project when I'm doing the project? No, absolutely not, because that money has spent and you can't get it back. What would have happened if the first two experts had agreed that everything was fine, but then the last one's like, whoa, you can't do that here because, and they give some really great reason. You can't go forward with the project. Have you still spent the $90,000? Absolutely.
So, but I still don't quite understand. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why you wouldn't just include that, because it's a cost analysis you're doing, right?
Okay, now here's the thing. What we are trying to do is, it's not a cost analysis, it's a project analysis. And we're trying to figure out costs that are associated with the project. And it's all about the decision. And so what's going to be different as a result of the decision that I make? If it's going to be an incremental cost, then I should take it into account on the decision. But if it's money that's already been spent and you can't get back regardless of the decision, should it impact your decision?
Yeah, that makes sense, because you're talking projects, so you're going to look at the cost whether that applies to cash flows versus what's not going to be cash flow, I guess.
Yeah, so or money you've already spent or already are stuck spending. For example, your student loans, regardless of what you do from here on out, unless Joe Biden just swoops in and gifts you all great amounts of money from my paycheck. By the way, did you guys know that? Someone else is paying for that stuff, and it could be like the plumber who decided not to go to college because he didn't want, guess what? Student debt, right? That doesn't sound quite right, does it? Oh, okay. So on with the story. You have promised to pay that money. You're going to have to pay that money regardless, right? That's a sunk cost. If you go into corporate world and you find out that you hate it, but someone offers you more money or even the same money to go drive a truck, and you figure out that you really enjoy driving trucks, should you allow that student debt that you're paying for your business degree to keep you from pursuing your dream of being an over-the-road trucker? Absolutely not. It's in the past. Okay. questions so far? Now let's talk about opportunity costs. An opportunity cost is what you give up in order to be able to do something else. So, yesterday morning, I got up, the weather was nice. Usually on the Monday mornings I exercise, but I had some lawn work that I needed to do, and the fact that the weather was nice got me out into the yard. Now, what did I have to give up in order to be able to work in the yard? I had to give up my exercise, right? We make these choices all the time. And so the opportunity cost is the next best thing that you had to give up in order to be able to do this thing that you're trying to decide on whether to do it. Okay, so when we invest in a project, we run into similar situations, and it causes people all sorts of problems. Let's give some examples here. What if I've got an empty warehouse that the company has owned forever, it's fully depreciated, it's in some sort of tax advantage zone where we don't pay any taxes? I mean, let's just assume that for all, in fact, we could even say that the insurance is not going to change as a result of taking on the project, and that none of the costs are going to be different as a result of taking on the project, the cost for the building. And you say, well, this is an empty building. Certainly it's just free to us and doesn't require a cash flow for the project. Would that be correct? No, why not? Mr. Engel?
You'd have to figure out what you would do if you weren't doing the building and
Yeah.
compare those.
If we aren't doing the project, what could we do with the warehouse? Yeah, you could sell it, right? If we weren't doing the project, we could sell the warehouse. And so what we need to do is figure out what our after-tax cash flow would be for selling that warehouse and include that as an opportunity cost at time zero. This concept blows people's minds because after all, the building's just sitting there not doing anything, right? Why should we have to include a cash flow for it? Now, the next question is, how do I get a value for this to use for my opportunity costs? How would you figure out what your warehouse is worth? Oh, for shame, he's late. Or are you returning?
Yeah.
Returning. Oh my goodness. People come and go. I went to see a Star Wars movie in 3D at the theater. And there was this woman, a rather large woman, sitting next to me, and she had this like 128-ounce Pepsi she was drinking. And she kept getting up and down throughout the movie to go to the bathroom. Who would have imagined, right? I missed like half that movie while her butt was in front of my face. So, at least you're thin and you haven't blocked anyone's view. Okay, now back to the story. How do we get the value of the warehouse?
You pay someone.
Ooh, so this is usually the first answer people give is the appraisal. Now, appraisers know what what they're going to do is they're going to go out and they're going to find similar properties, and they're going to figure out what those have recently sold for, and then they're going to make adjustments for how your property is different, right? Yours is next to a railroad where you could put stuff on the train, that's worth an extra $50,000 or whatever. Okay, now, let's ask this question. By the way, appraisers need to be paid, right? Can I get the similar information without paying anyone? How?
Zillow or something?
Okay, so nowadays students say Zillow, and let me tell you, just from looking at my house on Zillow, what's the other one, Redfin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so there's more than one of these. Do you think they all have the same value for my house? No. Do you think those values are close to what my, no. So it's a nice general idea, but you're still kind of far off. Who else could you talk to?
You can go down to tax assessor.
Okay, this is usually something that other people throw out, is the assessor. The assessed value on my house, I can tell you, is also not near the market value. And so sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high, but how do we actually know what the market value is going to be on the house? Kind of got to sell it, right? But who would I talk to if I were thinking about selling real estate? A realtor, very good. So here's how this game is played. And we'll start with my house, and then we'll talk about how it moves over to the commercial properties like we're talking about here. Every time I get ready to sell a house, and I've sold 3 of them, every time I get ready to sell a house, I call up 3 different realtors. And I say, I am thinking about selling my house. Have I promised to sell the house? No. Number 2, I am interviewing potential realtors. Even if I decide to sell the house, is there any guarantee that I'm going to be using this person's services? No. And then I say, would you be interested in making a proposal to represent my house? What's the realtor's answer always? Yes. Why? That's how they get paid, right? Real estate commissions. By the way, if you have dreams of becoming a realtor, you need to read up in the Wall Street Journal as to what recently happened to realtors. It's not as sweet as it was. Okay, now back to the story. So, how does this work? Well, the first one rings my doorbell, and it's a middle-aged woman, very nicely dressed, too much jewelry, too much perfume, and she has a binder about this thick. And what does she do? She comes in, we sit down, and the first third of the binder is about how freaking great she is, about how much real estate she sold, how much time she dedicates to the Boys and Girls Club, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like snooze fest, right? I'm zoned out. And then she says, and now here are some properties similar to yours that have recently sold. Has she got my attention now? Absolutely. And so we start walking through those, and she tells me how those are different from my house. And then finally, the thing that I've been waiting for, she says, and this is what I think your house is worth. Now, I've got one estimate. And I tell her, thank you, I will be getting back to you, which I always do, even if the answer is no. I always call people and say, look, we're going another way on this, right? But I do this 3 times, and here are the 3 estimates that I get. $345,000, $355,000, and $395,000. Yeah. The man who's lived many years and probably sold a house or 2 knows what's going on here. Let's ask the rest of you, what number should I use for my estimated value of the house? I could just average all of them, but does this number look like it doesn't quite belong? Yeah. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to average these 2. And let me tell you what the trick is the realtor is playing here. Most people are simpletons, and they're also greedy. By the way, they're not simpletons. They're inexperienced with this whole thing. Here's what people think. They're like, well, wait a minute. Donna can get me $395,000. Why would I deal with Alice or Shirley? So they decide to go with Donna. Donna lists the house for $395,000. What do you think happens?
She needs to talk down.
Yeah, so Donna, about a month into it, by the way, you've been letting strangers into your house, which is a big pain, right? To look at your stuff, and they're all like, oh, the furniture. I'm like, furniture's not included. Oh, well, anyway, so then after about a month, Donna says, you know what? I think we may have priced this a little too high. Now let's take it down to $375. And you're like, okay. So you take it to $375, and then what happens? Another month of sitting on your thumb, right? And then finally, she's like, well, maybe it should actually be $355. 2 months are gone. You could have already had the house sold, right? And by the way, you end up selling the house for $350 because no one wants to pay the asking price, usually, is how that works. Okay, so now we've said, well, we know how to get this number on a house. How about for a warehouse? It's the same thing. You just call in 3 realtors. You tell them, I'm interviewing, I'm thinking about selling it. And by the way, is that a lie? If you decide not to do the project, what might you do with the warehouse? Sell it. And if you sell it, who are you going to work with? One of those 3 realtors, right? because you're not going to waste your time interviewing another one unless they all three sucked. Okay, now, that's the building. That's the warehouse. Another one that people get confused about is the machine. Every time that I used to get a job at a new factory, I would walk the factory floor, and there would always be in the corner a machine covered with a tarp, just like a big piece of canvas. And I would peek under the tarp to see what kind of machine it was, because you know, I'm an engineer, I dig that sort of thing. And I would say, hey, what's the broaching machine over in the corner about? And they're like, well, we used to make this product. We don't make it anymore, so that machine's just sitting idle. Now, let's assume that we've got a project that we could use that broaching machine on. By the way, if you don't know what a broaching machine is, look it up. It's kind of fun. Let's look for the project we could use the broaching machine on. I've already paid for it. It's totally depreciated. It's just sitting there in the corner gathering dust. Should I include a cash flow for the broaching machine, or should I just assume that it's a gift from the manufacturing gods?
Cash flow.
Yeah, we need to have a cash flow for it. Here's why. What could I do with the machine if I don't use it in the project?
Sell it.
Yeah, I could sell it. And how do I get a number for it? Back when I was playing this game in the 90s, the internet wasn't so developed. And what I would do is call my machine dealer a man named Rusty, which I thought fit, right? And he would come in and tell me, yeah, I'd give you $50,000 for that. Now, I need to think about the after-tax cash flow, which we'll be talking about here in Chapter 8. But I could use that after-tax salvage value then as my opportunity cost for that machine. So yes, we do need to include a cash flow. By the way, how would you do it today in the world of the internet? Machine dealers are online. Machine dealers are online. You can go out and you can find out basically the retail price of a similar machine, but you would have to then discount that because, of course, how do dealers make money? They buy stuff from you for less money than they turn around and sell it. The trick is figuring out what is that percentage. And the first time you play this game, maybe you have to call Rusty in to take a look at it too. That gives you your idea of what the discount needs to be. Okay, so we always include these opportunity costs in our project, even though you may not think of them as real cash flows. They're cash flows that could happen if we don't take on the project. Does that make sense? Okay, now let's talk about side effects. If you've been watching American television at all, you've seen these advertisements for pharmaceuticals, and they'll say, and it's all really quick, and it's in small print on the screen. It's like, side effects may include dry mouth, blurry vision, fast heart rate, leakage, all sorts of things, right? And that's not, though, what the drug was intended to do, right? That would be the main effect. Lower your blood pressure, re-stimulate your hair growth, those sorts of things. Now, the question is this. If I am thinking about taking a drug, should I consider the side effects? Absolutely. So I got a prescription, and I was actually reading it. And some of the stuff that it said was going to happen to me was actually worse than the thing I was trying to fix. So I just chucked that into the garbage. I'm not going to do that, right? Okay, so you do need to consider side effects. Now, it turns out projects also have side effects. Projects that we consider also have side effects. They may impact the cash flows of other projects. And they can affect them in positive ways, meaning that they raise the cash flows in other projects, or they may affect them in negative ways, meaning they reduce the cash flows of other projects. Let's talk about synergy. Synergy is the idea that 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if we've got a project that does that, then the side effects would be positive. Let me give you an example. Actually, is anybody in here born before 2000? Well, I know Mr. Nylon. Were you guys were not even, you were like babies when this was going on. In the beginning, we had iTunes. You guys know about iTunes? Yeah. And so before iTunes, what did we do? We illegally downloaded from the internet, and then we burned it onto CDs because we were terrible, terrible people, right? But then as soon as Steve Jobs says, hey, wait a minute, you can pay for your music, the law-abiding among us said, well, that's an interesting idea. Except for one problem, Steve. Number one, I don't have a Mac, which at the time you had to have one. And number two, you couldn't take the music with you. You basically had to listen to it while at your computer. And so if you wanted to take the music with you, you had to carry a laptop around. A MacBook, actually. You had to carry a MacBook around. Does that sound attractive? No. Now, iTunes by itself was a positive NPV project because apparently there were enough nerds that like to sit at their Macs and listen to music that it worked out. But then they came out, they thought about a new project. And this new project was something called the iPod. And the iPod was where you could download your music from your MacBook and then take it with you. And by the way, by this time they came up with PC, had iTunes too. Now, what do you think happened? By the way, do you think the iPod by itself was a positive NPV project? It actually was. They were selling it for around $600 a piece. It was insane. My office mate in PhD school got one. He brought it in. He was so proud. Anyway, so that's a positive NPV project by itself, but it even had positive impacts in the sales at iTunes. What do you think happens to the sales at iTunes now that they got the iPod? Definitely goes up. Now, let's think about, move forward to 2007. I think all of you were alive by then. 2007, we have something new come out called the iPhone. By the way, I didn't buy an iPod. And so, of course, I didn't buy anything from iTunes because I'm not the kind of person to A, have a Mac, or B, carry it around if I did. So, what happens in 2007? They come out with the first iPhone, and actually I think it was 2007. By the way, did I buy one right away? No, never buy the first of anything that Apple does. This new thing that you wear on your head and puts you in a different world, wait for version 2. Right? Always wait for version 2. Same thing with the Apple Watch. Okay, now moving on. The iPhone, finally, I bought the iPhone 3G, which was the second one. And I'm sitting there on the couch playing with it, and I told my wife, I'm like, wow, this thing has an iPod built in. And then I'm like, I wonder if all my favorite songs from the 80s are on iTunes. And sure enough, they were. And so what do? I buy some music to put on my iPhone. Now, that is more synergy, right? Bringing out iPhone increased the cash flows in iTunes. But what do you think it did to sales of iPod? Yeah, definitely decreased the sales of the iPod. What do we call it when a project decreases the sales in another project? We call it erosion or cannibalism. So think about erosion. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, first of all, don't go, it's just a big hole. But secondly, if you go, you'll notice that it's been worn away by the Colorado River and by the wind. It's erosion. It's eroding off those grains of sand to form this big hole in the ground. That's erosion. What if you had a project that was wearing away the cash flows of other existing projects? We would also call that erosion. Can someone tell me what a cannibal is? Okay, so you're being very specific here about it being a person who eats another person, but actually it's more general than that. It's any creature that eats its own kind. So, for example, did you know that chickens are cannibals? Oh yeah. And so I never feel bad when I eat my Chick-fil-A sandwich because I know that chicken is an evil creature with a dark heart, right? Not gonna break my heart to eat that chicken. Okay, so cannibalism is another way to think about this. If our new project eats at the cash flows of the other projects, then that's the same thing as erosion or cannibalism. In this case, we had cannibalism of the iPod by the iPhone. Now, when making the decision to do the iPhone, should you consider the increased sales at iTunes as a side effect? Absolutely. Should you also consider the decrease in sales for the iPod? Absolutely. They're both incremental cash flows that happen as a result of taking on the project. Now, sometimes students say, wait a minute, it's insane to do a project that cannibalizes your own stuff. There's really only one way to find out, and that is to do an NPV analysis and include the cannibalism. If it still comes out positive, then you still do the project. Let me talk about what happens if you don't cannibalize your own sales. Who's going to do it for you? Yeah, competitors will cannibalize your sales. I'll give you an example. I was working at a company that made truck suspensions, and they were welded together out of a bunch of steel. Really simple geometry, easy to manufacture, but less than optimal. They were very heavy. By the way, any weight that you're carrying down the road in a truck suspension is weight that you can't be carrying in cargo, because you're only allowed to have a certain amount of weight on the road. The government forces you to drive over scales, right? So there are all sorts of reasons you want a lighter suspension. Also, it burns less fuel, right? Because you're not carrying that whole weight of the suspension. And so our old suspensions came out to about $400 per axle, which was, keep in mind these are $1999, $400 an axle. We came up with a new one, and this thing was a thing of beauty. It had all these great curves, and it was totally optimized so that the stress was exactly the same throughout the entire suspension, which means that it's as light as it possibly could be. It was aerodynamic. It was a thing of beauty. Here's the problem. When you design something that's beautiful, it's very difficult to manufacture, right? Because it's easy to bend a right angle into a piece of metal. It's very difficult to do one of these, right? And that's why you see cheaper cars tend to have more simple geometry. Think back to the original Hyundais that came over here from Korea. They were absolutely flat on the sides. It's because it's cheap to manufacture that. Okay, now remember I told you the old suspension was $400 an axle. The new one is $2,000 an axle. Oh yeah. Now, first of all, we can make the case to the trucking companies that they will have fuel savings, and the additional cargo will more than pay for that. But it turned out that the profit margin on these new axles was lower. In fact, the absolute dollar profit on the new suspensions was lower. Why did we continue on with that project? Because if we hadn't, then our competitors, a company called Meritor, they would have eaten our lunch, and we would have been left with basically nothing. So it does make sense to cannibalize your own sales unless you have no competitors at all. Then maybe it's up to you whether or not you do. Questions? These are called side effects. Do we include side effects in our analysis? Absolutely, because they are incremental. They do impact us. Okay, now we're getting ready to jump into the Baldwin Company example. And we are going to walk through that, but I want to first of all walk through these formulas that I have here on the board so that we're all on the same page. Remember we said when we're going to do net present value analysis or payback or any of these things, we have to have the future cash flows and their timing. And in fact, the cash flow that we're looking for is cash flow from assets. Cash flow from assets, that's what CFFA stands for. And that is going to be the amount of money that we put into either the cash flow register of our TI-BA2 Plus or the one that we're going to discount using Excel to figure out what is the net present value of the project. So how do we figure cash flow from assets? Well, the first piece of it is OCF. What does OCF stand for? Operating cash flow. Operating cash flow. Then we subtract out the change in NWC. What's NWC? Net working capital. By the way, this is a Greek letter delta. In science and mathematics, it means change. And then we're going to subtract NCS. What does NCS stand for? Net capital spending. And so this is basically the money coming in, and these are money going out. That's why they've got negatives on them. Now let's break down OCF further. OCF is equal to EBIT. What's EBIT stand for? Earnings before interest and taxes. And then we're going to add back, what is the EP? Depreciation, and then we're going to subtract taxes. Now I want you to notice something here. We've got earnings before interest and taxes, and we're subtracting the taxes. So we've got earnings before interest, which has depreciation subtracted out. That's why we have to add it back. But why are we doing nothing with interest? How are we going to account for the financing costs of this project? I'll give you a hint. Think back to chapter 12. What were we figuring out in chapter 12? Yeah, it's the discount rate that's appropriate to the risk of the cash flows, right? And so that's what we're going to be used to handle the financing costs. So you will, write this down, you will never see interest or dividends included in a capital budgeting analysis. Never see interest or dividends. And by the way, if you do see it, it means that someone doesn't know what they're doing, because we're going to take care of that with the discount rate. So don't ever include interest or dividends.
In the what you said?
Say again?
You don't include it in what?
Don't include it in your capital budgeting analysis. Don't include interest or dividends in your capital budgeting analysis. Do not include interest or dividends in your capital budgeting analysis, because after all, we are going to discount all these cash flows with the discount rate that's appropriate to the risk. Okay, now, something else we're going to have to talk about here is book value. By the way, book value, depreciation, the only reason we care about these things is because of taxes. The only reason we care about them is because of taxes. The higher your depreciation is, the lower your taxes are. So let's talk about the book value. The book value at time t plus 1 is equal to the previous book value minus the current depreciation. So current book value is equal to previous book value minus the current depreciation. That's the one I prefer to use. This is my favorite. You could also do it this way: historical cost minus accumulated depreciation. If I do it that way, I have to calculate another line in my analysis, and that is I have to add up the depreciation to get accumulated depreciation. If I do it the way I'm suggesting here, it saves me a line in my spreadsheet that I don't have to put in. Now, why in the world do we care about book value? Because it turns out that it's going to impact our cash flow when we get around to selling the machine at the end. Let's call it a machine. We're going to be figuring out something called the after-tax salvage value. And that's going to be equal to the market value, which is the amount that I can sell it for right now. The amount that I'll be able to sell it for at the end of the project. The market value is the amount that I'll be able to sell it for at the end of the project. The market value is the amount I'll be able to sell it for at the end of the project. Now, if we lived in a world without taxes, then everything would be cool. But here's the problem. We do have taxes. And we are going to have to pay taxes on any market value that is above and beyond the book value. We're going to have to pay taxes on any market value that is above and beyond the book value. Most machines that I've dealt with were depreciated down to 0 because they were so old. If we sold them, this book value would be 0. We would be paying taxes on the entire market value. And so most of the time, the after-tax salvage value is going to be less than the market value. But there are some situations in which the book value is greater than the market value. So I'll give you an example. I was working in a factory in Duncan, Oklahoma. We were machining magnesium. And if you don't know about magnesium, it's what makes the bright sparklies in the fireworks. And it burns really, really hot. In fact, it burns so hot that you can't put the fire out with water. And so the instructions, when we were machining magnesium, one of the first things it said is, get a bucket of sand. What do you think the bucket of sand is for?
Suffocating the fire.
Yeah, to suffocate, because the only way we're going to do this is by getting rid of the oxygen. We need something that is going to survive being that hot and still be able to smother it. By the way, the sand's going to turn into glass. That's how hot magnesium is. Okay, so first step in the instruction is get a bucket of sand. By the way, do you think the people on the night shift always read the instructions? No. And so we had some schmuck who decided he was going to machine magnesium and he didn't want to carry the bucket. And so what happened? What can you guess on the one night when they don't bring the bucket, what's going to happen?
Fire.
Yeah, huge fire. Now, no way to get the fire out. What do you think happens to the machine?
Burned up.
Book value 0, right? I mean, market value 0. No one's going to pay me anything for this pile of ashes. But by the way, the machine wasn't completely depreciated, so it still has a book value. And so the market value of 0 minus the book value gives us a negative here. Negative times a negative is positive, so you get a tax refund. Now, why do we have these situations? It's because of depreciation. As I depreciate an asset, I am doing two things. Number one, the book value is coming down. Number two, I am writing that off of my taxes, so it's reducing the amount of tax that I pay. If I over depreciate an asset, then I have underpaid my taxes. Do you think the government's going to let you get by with that? No, they're going to make you eventually pay, and that's what this is about. If I've over depreciated this asset, then book value is going to be less than market value, and so the government is going to claim that amount in taxes. Now, if you've recently filled out your own personal taxes, you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, there's going to be a penalty because we over depreciated and underpaid our taxes. Not in this situation. Not in this situation. Now, knowing that there's no penalty for paying your taxes, over depreciating the asset, is what we're going to want to do every time. And here's why. When would you rather pay $500 worth of taxes? Time 1, 2, and 3, or at time 7? Oh, I'd rather pay them at the end because of time value of money, right? Does that make sense? If I've got a cash inflow, I'd rather it be sooner in time. If I've got a cash outflow of the same number of dollars, I'd rather it be later in time. So that $500 in taxes I'm going to have to pay out in year 7, is it really worth $500 to me today? No. Is it really worth $500 in time 1, 2, or 3? No. Because of the time value of money. And so we would always rather over depreciate and underpay our taxes. Now, one more example of where we might under depreciate and therefore overpay our taxes, and that is the semiconductor manufacturing industry. So, semiconductors, the chips that make everything work, right? Those things are printed or made on processes. And the way they describe those processes is in nanometers, which is like 1 × 10 to the -9th meter. Very, very small, small, small. Now, the smaller the nanometer number, that's the smaller the connection between the transistors, that is the less energy it's going to use, the faster it's going to calculate, and the less heat it's going to produce. And so there's this constant race to get thinner, thinner, thinner connections between these transistors. What does that mean? If 10 years ago you bought 15 nanometer, let's make it 3 years ago, you bought 15 nanometer equipment, and now someone just came out with 10 nanometer. If I want to be competitive, what do I have to do? I've got to switch to the new equipment, even though I have yet to depreciate the entirety of that old equipment out according to the accounting methods. Now, that means that my book value is still going to be positive, but what do you think the market value is for that equipment? It's not very high, simply because everybody's moving on to the new standard, right? And so the market value is going to be low, the book value is going to be high. Once again, in that situation, you'll probably find yourself getting a tax refund because you have under depreciated the asset and therefore you have overpaid your taxes. Questions? Okay, now net working capital. Hopefully you remember, what is CA? Current assets, what's CL? Current liabilities. When we take on a new project, we're going to see that it's going to require more net working capital, and it's actually the change that we're concerned about. So that's every period we're going to look at the change in net working capital. Now, an assumption that we always make is that our net working capital returns to zero at the end of the project. Our net working capital returns to zero at the end of the project. And so here's the way it works. The mothership lets down some money, and that is a cash outflow for the mothership. But then at the end, the mothership gets back the remaining net working capital. That's a cash inflow. And so we're going to probably have a negative cash flow here in the beginning. That's going to reduce cash flow, and then it's going to go the other way. But we'll get to that when we do the example. Now, the other assumption that we make has to do with opportunity costs. I assume that I get all my opportunity costs back at the end of the project. So that building that I included $250,000 for at time zero, there's going to be a negative $250,000 cash flow at the end. It was really funny when I started teaching. This was, say, 2006. And my students were like, oh, but Dr. Haggard, real estate values always go up. So shouldn't we include a higher number for that, getting the money back at the end? And I said, first of all, no, real estate value doesn't always go up. Secondly, we don't have a good guess of what it should be, so we're just going to stick with the same number. Now, what happens between 2007 and 2009, Mr. Nylon? What happens to real estate values?
They dropped drastically.
They dropped drastically. I lost $39,000 on a house that I lived in for 1 year. That's how bad.
I lost quite a bit after the house I lived in for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
I broke even.
Yeah.
Had to sell it for payoff.
So, long story short, do real estate prices always go up? No. When I was telling this story in 2010-11, students would say, oh, but Dr. Haggard, real estate values always go down. Shouldn't we consider a lower number for the end? Like, no, we don't know what way they're going to go, so we just use the same number. Now, the machine, we do exactly the same thing. I assume I could sell it for $50,000 today. At the end, I could get it back or I could sell it for $50,000. Is that necessarily as true with the machine? Probably not, right? But we don't know. So we're just going to include that as our placeholder cash flow. Any question about these before we jump into the project? Do that. There we go. Okay, now let's get around to doing our Baldwin Company example. I'm going to be doing it on Excel. You guys, in fact, I will post this on Blackboard so you guys can download it. And here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to put it on a USB drive, and I want you to make a necklace and wear that USB drive around, because someday someone's going to say, James Sunday, I need you to do a net present value analysis. And you're not going to remember how this all works, right? Then you're like, I have my USB drive. I can plug it in And by the way, you can email me until July 31st, 2037. You can email me, ask for help, right? What happens July 31st, 2037? I'm out of here, baby, right? Okay. And I'm teasing a little bit. You could put it on Dropbox, right, where you could grab it later so you wouldn't have to wear it around and get it all sweaty. Okay, now, so I want you to have this, and here's why this is important. If you do this on Excel and you do it by hand, the first time probably takes you about the same amount of time. Maybe takes you a little less time by hand. The foolish person says, "Poof, I'll just do it by hand then." Why would the wise person go ahead and build out the spreadsheet?
Share.
Yeah, so you could share it and you could use it the next time. By the way, do you think it's possible that people do the same project more than once? Absolutely. Now, will we need to update the numbers? Yeah, because the machine's going to cost more, right? Things like that. But it may take me an hour and a half the first time, but it'll only take me 5 minutes the second time. That makes you a more productive employee. By the way, what do you think is more valuable? A more productive employee or a less productive employee? More productive, right? And when it comes time for layoffs, who gets laid off first? The less productive employee. When it comes time for raises, who's more likely to get a raise? The more productive employee. By the way, who do you think has more time to squirrel around on Instagram? The more productive employee. Does that make sense? You know, when you figure out a way to make something more productive at work, let's say it saves you 10 minutes. Here's what I would tell you to do. Give 5 minutes of that to your employer. Take 5 minutes for yourself as an intrinsic reward. Why? Because you need to be rewarded for doing this sort of thing, right? So you'll keep doing it. Does that make sense? And maybe the math is off there. Maybe give 8 minutes to your employer, 2 minutes to yourself. You guys can figure it out for yourselves. By the way, Gen Z, you guys are like, no, I'm going to keep 9 and give 1 to the... Okay, you guys figure that out for yourselves. All I'm telling you is take a little bit of the time for yourself, even if it just means that you get to go to the bathroom 1 more time per day. Okay, now, we've talked about the importance of Excel. What we're going to do is we're going to read through this project, and as we go, we are going to put things in a spreadsheet. I want as many inputs as possible up here in the upper left-hand corner. Because, do you need another one?
No, I don't have.
You don't have one? I wonder why you don't have one. Is that a spare? Is that a spare? You got the book, okay. The numbers may be slightly different, but it's the same idea. Okay. Okay, so we are going to go through here, and I'm going to put those numbers in the upper left-hand corner. And here's why. Because when we are doing this project again for the new machine, what am I going to do? All I've got to do is go in and enter those changed things once, and it recalculates the entire rest of it. I came home, that's why we call the spreadsheet the what-if machine, right? Well, what if the price is $10 higher? What if the price is $10 lower? What if our costs are up by 25%? I can put it in here and figure out what's going on. It was funny, I came home from engineering school, this is back in the early 90s, and I told my mom about this amazing thing that I just learned about. It's called the spreadsheet. My mom says, we were doing spreadsheets back in the 60s. I said, are you talking about a piece of paper? She said, yeah. I said, would your piece of paper automatically recalculate everything for you when you changed one number? And she said, no. I said, that's why this is amazing, and yours isn't, right? Because it'll do all the calculations. So that's why all that stuff up in the upper left-hand corner, that's why I want to do that. Okay, so here we go. The Baldwin Company, originally established in 1965, blah, da, 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 da. We don't care about any of that. Now they are talking about the market for brightly colored bowling balls. Do you guys know about bowling? This is a big date night in the 80s, right? I hated it because I don't want to wear other people's shoes. Okay, so brightly colored bowling balls and a large number of bowlers that might value their appearance and style above performance. So, are they saying that these balls are better? No, they're just pretty, right? Okay. As a, let's see, opportunity. Okay, as a result, they did an investigation of the marketing potential of brightly colored bowling balls. Now, it says here that they sent a questionnaire to customers. Now, given what we talked about earlier with the goat milk, is that really the way to go with your marketing survey? No. Where should we go? If you were going to talk to people about bowling balls, where would you go? The bowling alley. And once you got there, what would you do? Show them your balls. Canada, get your mind out of the gutter. By the way, my two lame bowling jokes, I've exhausted them both. Okay, so yeah, you're gonna show the people these bowling balls, and you're gonna get their feedback, right? Might even let them bowl with them. Who knows? Okay, and they come up with this concept that they might be able to take 10 to 15% of the market share. Of course, some people at Baldwin complained about the cost of the test marketing, which was $250,000. So let's go ahead and put that number in here. $250,000. Now, let's make a note here. Are we going to include this cash flow? No, why not? Yeah, it's a sunk cost. One time I gave an essay exam to students on this topic, and this guy says, no, I will not include it because it is a sunk cost. Well, it does suck that we spent that money for nothing, but no, it's a sunk cost. Okay, so we're going to exclude that. Let's see what else we got here. In any case, Baldwin Company is now considering investing in a machine to produce the bowling balls. The bowling balls will be manufactured in a building owned by the firm and located near Los Angeles. The building, which is vacant, and the land can be sold for $150,000 after taxes. Do we include or exclude? Include. What kind of cost is this? Opportunity? Yeah, it's an opportunity cost. There we go. Okay. Working with his staff, Meadows is preparing an analysis. The cost of the bowling ball machine is $100,000. By the way, that's at time 0. And they tell us that it would be worth $30,000 at the end of 5 years. By the way, that $30,000 is going to be our market value for after-tax salvage value. Okay, now they start to give us information by year. So here's where I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to put in years here, and we're going to go horizontally with the years. So I'm going to say year. And do you think I should start with year 1 or year 0?
0.
0, very good. By the way, they've told us this is a 5-year project, right? Okay. And they tell us that our unit sales, they give it to us by units. What do you think is going to be here at time 0?
0.
0, very good. So I'm just going to skip right over it. Now at time 1, it's 5,000. And if I type something up here wrong, tell me. Time 2 is 8,000. Time 3 is 12,000. Time 4 is 10,000. And time 5 is 6,000. Okay, so there's my unit sales. By the way, why did I say unit sales? Because if I just said sales, what would you think that was in? Dollars, right? Okay, the price of the bowling balls in the first year will be $20. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say BB price year 1. And I'm going to put that in as 20. And here's why I'm doing that. Do you think that perhaps these estimates might change? Yeah. Who gives us the numbers? Who gives us both of these numbers, the price and the units? Where do we get this from?
Marketing.
Yeah, the marketing people. And what do we know about any kind of forecast?
It's optimistic.
Yeah, it's always wrong. And when you get it from marketing people, it's optimistic, right? And so I might want to be able to play around with these numbers, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's see what else they tell us here. And he believes the bowling ball market is highly competitive, so he believes that the price of bowling balls will increase at only 2% per year. BB price growth 0.02. I don't know why I suddenly decided to go to percentages there. Let's see, number. Okay. Perfectly fine for it to be in percentages, but we can do it this way. Insert. Oh, no, insert. Okay, now that I have that information, I can come up with my unit price. By the way, do we have a price at times 0? No. Here's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say equal to, and then I'm just going to click up here. And that way, if I change this number, the one down below changes too. So that's how that works. Now, the next one for time 2, how am I going to find that value? I'm going to take a look at the previous one multiplied by, yeah, 1.02. So we're going to say 1 plus this growth rate. I'm going to close those parentheses, and then I've got 20.4. And everything is fine until I do this. By the way, I can copy this formula over. I can put this big white plus, it turns to black. I can left click and just drag it over. And you say, wait a minute, why is it the price going up? And it's because this thing is moving along, right? It's moving out into these spaces. So if I want to make this work, what I have to do is a fixed cell reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this B6. I like to click right between them. And my choices are I can either put in dollar signs to get the fixed cell reference, or I can hit F4. And when I do that, then I've got fixed cell references, and I drag them over. Now, could you do that just by typing the dollar signs in? Absolutely you can. Why do I choose to use F4 instead? I can never remember whether the dollar signs come first or last, right? And I guarantee you if I guessed, I would get it wrong. Now, F4 is on the Windows PC. On Mac, it's different. The good news is you have Google. You can look up and see what it is, right? Okay, now, another thing that we're going to do here, or not do, it's going to give us a little difference from the book. And that is we're not going to round these to dollars and cents. You can, there's a function for that, perfectly welcome to use it. I'm not going to waste my time on it right now. And by the way, you're going to see that our NPV numbers come out only like $2 different as a result. Okay, now I can figure out my dollar sales as using the information I already have. How am I going to do that? It's equal to what? Yeah, the sales times the price. Now, I can just copy that over, and there I go. Now I've got all of my sales. By the way, Control S. Control S does what? Saves. I can't tell you what life was like back in the early 90s when we had viruses running loose and nothing to control them. You had to save every like 2 minutes because you knew it was going to take a dump on you before the night was done. Things are getting a little better now. If you're using Office 365, what happens? It auto saves, right? But the bad news is not only does it save the good stuff, it saves the bad stuff. And if you screw something up, right? Okay. Let's see what else we've got going on here. Let's see, the general inflation rate is 5%. I don't know if we're going to need that, but we'll put it up here. Notice that I am inserting stuff, and I'm going to keep inserting as long as I need to put new stuff up there. I'll just insert some new rows. Conversely, the plastic used to produce bowling balls is rapidly becoming more expensive. Because of this, production cash flows are expected to grow at a 10% rate per year. First year production cost will be $10 per unit. BB cost year 1 is 10. BB cost growth is how much? 10%? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Whew. So now we can come down here and say unit cost. And we will start with equal to that one right there. Now, how am I going to figure out 4 times 2? I'm going to click on time 1, and then I'm going to multiply by 1 plus, and then where do I click?
C9.
Yeah, see, B9, right there. Now, before I pull off of this thing, what should I do? F4, because otherwise we're going to wind up in the same mess we were a moment ago. And then I'm going to copy that all the way over. And the next thing that I'll be able to figure out is the variable cost. Remember, the variable cost is the one that is totally dependent on the number of units you produce. And so how are we going to get that? We're going to take the sales multiplied by the cost, and we're going to drag that over. Okay, now this project does not include a fixed cost. I'm going to put one in here just in case later on when you've got the USB around your neck that you need one. So we're going to put in a fixed cost here. And now, fixed cost doesn't have to be the same every year, but we're just going to assume that it is. And so I'm just going to say equal to that. And I'll just, let's see, equal to the prior one, and then I'll just drag that across. There we go. How would I come up with total cost then? Yeah, just add them together, right? Equal to variable cost plus fixed cost. I'm going to drag that over. Okay, I'm going to save that one more time, and that's going to be as far as we get today. Should you bring your handout with you next time? Absolutely. Are there any questions? Okay. If you liked today's show, please be sure to like or subscribe. See you next time.